honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an honour to stand in the House. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Moose Jaw Lake, Senator Lanigan, for splitting his time with me today. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's mandate letter or code of conduct to his ministers regarding ministerial conduct reads as follows. Ministers and parliamentary secretaries must act with honesty and must uphold the highest ethical standards so that the public confidence and trust in the integrity and the impartiality of government are maintained and enhanced. As public office holders, ministers and parliamentary secretaries are subject to Part 1 requirements of the Ethical and Political Activity Guidelines. The final line of this says, moreover, they have an obligation to perform their official duties and arrange their private affairs in a manner that will bear the closest public scrutiny, Madam Speaker. This obligation is not fully discharged merely by acting within the law. Madam Speaker, I bring that up because, as I said earlier, we are here today, and I agree with those in the comments that have been about the House earlier. We definitely have more important things to debate. But the facts are the facts, Madam Speaker, is that on the government that campaigned talking about bringing real change to the House and bringing an open and transparent government, now all of a sudden within the last 6 months or the short term that they've been in power, that we are seeing some questionable activity. And, Madam Speaker, perception is that there are some things that are going on that maybe are not right. Now, as I said earlier on, the issue for me, Madam Speaker, is the fact that when this was found out, when this issue or this event was discovered, it wasn't a matter of the Minister of Justice being proactive, as mentioned earlier by the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. It was when a media outlet reported this event and made it public. Then, and only then, did the Minister of Justice report that this event and asked regarding any impropriety or if there's any broken rules of conduct. It was then, and only then, was that brought to light. Now, shortly thereafter, after the event was done, it was brought forth in the House. The question was raised by our honourable colleague. And it was at that time that the Minister of Justice stood in the House and said that she attended the event merely as the MP for Vancouver Granville. And her head policy maker or advisor was there merely as a volunteer. So again, questions arise, Madam Speaker. You know, again, mistakes happen. We're all human. We all make mistakes. And as I tell my kids, and as I've been married for a long time, Madam Speaker, so I know when to say I'm sorry and I made a mistake. Sometimes we have to do that. And we can forgive, but sometimes you can't forget. And the minister stood in the House and said that she was merely there as the Vancouver Granville Member of Parliament, and again, her head policymaker was there as a volunteer. So again, a question right off the top of my head there would be, was the policymaker there merely as a volunteer? Did she claim per diems? Did she take a day off? You know, the actions, in fact, were not clear and consistent, as again brought forth by the members of the other side. As I said earlier on, I've been married for a long time. I have 4 kids. I have coached for a very long time. And diversionary tactics I'm very used to, Madam Speaker. When you have your kids that are going, hey, but look over here, or they did it first, it doesn't make it right. And we're talking about today's Parliament. We're not talking about what's been done in the past. Madam Speaker, I think, again, as our honourable colleague just previously mentioned, that perhaps Canadians were disillusioned as to how government was moving forth. I think successive governments, everybody sets out with best intentions. But in the ways of the world and as we go about our daily lives, sometimes we stumble. But stumbling is one thing, Madam Speaker. Standing up and being able to say, you know what, I made a mistake, is another. And that is commendable. The minister attended an event, not only attended the event, but advertised that this event was a $500 a plate or, for access to the Minister of Justice, to a law firm that does considerable amount of work with the federal government. Not only that, but the lawyers that would have attended that could be in line for government appointments. So, Madam Speaker, I'm sure you can see where some of the, I guess, confusion lies with those of us on this side and some of the concern. You know, again, as we talked about an open and transparent government, the story has changed many times. Well, I was just there as a member of Parliament for my riding. My head policymaker was there as a volunteer. You know, when we stand in the House, oftentimes we forget who we really represent, and we forget who we should be speaking to or speaking for. And we should be speaking for all Canadians. And Canadians, we should speak in common language. And Madam Speaker, would this hold the smell test in your family? If you had somebody or a member of your family that came up and said one thing and then the next day the story changed, would that hold the smell test for that? Would that pass the test? And the facts are the facts, Madam Speaker. There's a bit of a smell to this. And while we should be debating and talking about the crisis at Awapiskat, or the deficiencies in Budget 2016, or the reason why it took the Minister of Indigenous Affairs a week after our emergency debate on the suicides in Attawapiskat to get to that community. In fact, we're talking about an issue that is relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but it speaks volumes to what we have seen over the course of the last 6 months with this government. They campaigned that they would have a mere $10 billion deficit. March 22nd, what did we see? A $29.4 billion deficit. They campaigned saying that they would lower the taxes on small business. And instead, what they've done is froze it. And what we've seen now is that they're likely going to increase that. It is, again, another string of confusing and maybe misleading tactics. So as our job on this side of the House is to hold the government's feet to the fire. That's what we're doing, because Canadians have that same question. And as our honourable colleague earlier on stated, maybe they were looking for some real change. And instead, they've got the same Liberal government making the same promises and then breaking them, and maybe looking after their friends a little bit too much. But, you know, Canadians deserve better, Madam Speaker. I think they deserve better from all of us. And I would agree, maybe there are things that we need to look at, and maybe we do need to collectively as a whole, you know, be better, strive to be better, strive to be more accountable. Remember who we represent. Speak the language, the common language of our constituents, so that they understand what this is and what this really means. And that we're not pointing fingers and saying, well, guess what, they did it, it's okay for us to do it too, and so take that. And you ain't seeing nothing here. And the spoken and diversionary tactics, the shell games that we're seeing. Let's be honest, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if there was a mistake made, all the minister would have to do is stand up and say, I erred in my ways, I made a mistake, it will never happen again. And I think the members opposite can agree that if we did the same, or if I did the same, I would be doing the same thing and standing up. And I've stood in the House, Madam Speaker, I've made a mistake in the House. And I've stood in the House and I have apologized publicly to the mistake I've made. And I think that that's all that Canadians are asking for, is that this Minister of Justice be held to a higher level. Maybe all of us held to a higher level. And if we make that mistake, Madam Speaker, that we are able to stand up and apologize and say we're sorry and make sure that we move forward with truth and real change. Thank you.